Your narcissistic parent probably told you how much they suffered in their childhood and how terrible their parents were and how you are so lucky to have them as parents instead of, you know, your grandparents as your parents because they went through so much in their childhood. And so you start feeling sorry for them at such a young age, and it just becomes this conditioned thing where you just feel sorry for your narcissistic mother or father or whatever parental figure. And then, you know, you live your life a couple decades into it, and as you get older, that's kind of when the problems start to happen with your narcissistic parent, right? Like when you're a child, you don't really have a personality or opinions or know anything about the world really, and so you're much easier to manipulate and control. A lot of my clients, they wonder like, why do I think I had a good childhood? My narcissistic mother wasn't that bad when I was like 6 years old. Of course she wasn't that bad when you were 6 years old. You didn't have a personality. You weren't rebelling against her. You didn't have ideas and thoughts on what you might want to do with your life that had nothing to do with what your mother decided she wanted for your life. You might break free for a while, but then your narcissistic parent starts aging. The thing is, when you're raised by a narcissistic parent, you kind of develop a lot of empathy. A lot of people think that if you were raised by a narcissistic parent, you end up being a narcissist, but obviously those people who think that were not raised by a narcissist, so what do they know? We end up actually having so much empathy. Like the world obviously needs more people with empathy, but the problem is when we start directing our empathy in the wrong places. So you start directing your empathy towards your narcissistic parent, especially when they start aging and they start, you know, going on about how they had such a rough life and a hard childhood and, you know, all that kind of stuff. And they'll usually do this when you try to sort of set some boundaries or separate yourself or, you know, lower contact with them. And then they go ahead and they make you feel guilty, right? They make you feel sorry for them. They've been through all of this stuff. Who cares what you went through? Like, you're completely irrelevant. Your experiences, your situation, your childhood, irrelevant because it's all about your narcissistic parent. And then you start feeling guilty, and people who feel guilty are easier to control. You start believing that, oh my gosh, have I committed this heinous crime for wanting to separate myself from my aging narcissistic mother? What kind of monster am I for doing this? And then you get closer to your narcissistic mother, you start helping her out a bit, and then the cycle of abuse continues again and again and again. And so this is why it's so important to understand the cycle of abuse. First and foremost, love bomb, devalue, discard. So love bombing is basically anything that appeals to your empathy. So when they're giving you, you know, their sob story about what a hard life they had and all that, they make you feel sorry for them. And one of the worst things that you can do is increase contact with somebody just because you feel sorry for them, because they know that that's what you're doing and they know that's how to get you, and that cycle is going to keep going over and over and over again. And then of course we've got the devaluation, right? So once the narcissist has gained your trust, and in this case, this specific situation where they're aging, they're, you know, maybe not doing so well with their health, and they're telling you how horrible they had it in life and, you know, woe is me, tiny violin in the background, all that kind of stuff. That is a form of love bombing because it appeals to your empathy, and they know that they're going to gain your trust, right? When they're like being vulnerable with you, when they're sharing, you know, all these horrible things that are going on in their life and all the stuff that they've been through, it's a vulnerability that they're sharing. It's almost like, oh, like they're being open with me and, you know, sharing this information. That must mean that things might be better. And they never are. And then of course, as soon as they're satisfied that they have gained your trust from that love bombing, this is when the devaluation starts. And for those of you who have aging narcissistic parents who are trying to like convince you to live with them and take care of them, I mean, how do I even phrase this? This is, it's like a trap, because they're going to be on their best behavior the moment that, you know, you sell your house or break your lease or whatever and move in with them. You're gonna have some serious fucking regrets. You're gonna have so many regrets that maybe your intuition was telling you were gonna have, but you chose not to listen to them, or you genuinely believed that things were going to be so good this time, and, you know, your mother needed you and all that. And I mean, I'm all for people taking care of family members, but like when it's an abusive situation, I mean, that's what like personal support workers are for. That's what nursing homes are for, and that's what the government is for, you know? Like it's in most places in the world, adults are responsible for themselves. And, you know, just because you have adult children, it doesn't mean they are required to take care of you when you get older, right? Like, you know, people who have kids for the purpose of having like a caretaker when they get older, like kind of selfish, kind of narcissistic, right? Just throwing that out there. Like your children are not your future nurses and doctors. Like that's what nurses and doctors are for. You know, that's why these facilities exist. But a lot of the times, like narcissistic parents will convince you to drop everything in your life, move in with them, take care of them so they can keep abusing you. And now, you know, if you have sold your house or broken your lease, now you're basically, you have nowhere to live and you're going to have to start over all over again. That's going to be a huge pain in the ass. So it's going to be, you know, there's going to be that part of you that just wants to work things out and make this work, because if it doesn't, like, fuck, you know, it's just going to be such a shit show. And spoiler alert, it's not going to work out. It is absolutely not going to work out. It's going to be a shit show. This cycle of abuse is going to continue over and over and over again. And narcissistic parents do not change. Narcissists in general do not change. Somebody who changes, they need to make that decision for themselves because they're in so much pain and anguish that they choose to go down the avenues of making that change for themselves. And change takes a very long time. True, genuine, lasting change does not take like 2 weeks. It takes years in a lot of cases. And the thing with narcissists is that they don't think anything is wrong with them. They don't change their behavior, they change target. And they will cycle through that cycle of abuse, love bomb, devalue, discard, and they might tell you that they're gonna change, but that's, again, love bombing. They're trying to gain your trust because they know that telling you that they're gonna change is something that you really, really wanna hear. And as soon as you hear it, you might start trusting them, and they can sense when you trust them. And then we go back into the devaluation. That's all you're ever going to have to look forward to with a narcissist. They will manipulate you in any way that they can appeal to your empathy to make you feel sorry for them and make you feel guilty. Because when you feel guilty, what's the first thing you want? You want to stop feeling guilty. So you're more likely to act on that guilt by making a decision and taking an action that is going to benefit your narcissistic parents. So let's say you're being guilted into living with your narcissistic mother. Like this is like a worst case scenario kind of thing, right? It could even be something little like visiting your narcissistic mother once a week or whatever, right? But let's say you're being guilt tripped actively by your narcissistic mother. She's saying, oh, I went through all this stuff, like my life's so hard, da 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 da, and you're being guilt tripped. So you might take an action. And the thing is, when we make decisions in an emotional state, we make bad decisions. So if you're making a decision in a state of guilt, you're gonna make a bad decision, right? So if your mother's trying to convince you to go live with her because she's getting old and she needs your help and things are gonna be different this time, and you know, she'll do anything that you want, whatever. And you know, she had such a bad childhood, and if you don't do this for her, you're horrible and ungrateful and whatever. We all know the song and dance. You might make a decision by acting on that guilt to sell your house or break your lease, go live with her, and then everything that you've ever worked for in your life is gonna go to shit because you felt too guilty to do something different. And this is why it's so important to process the guilt. This is why I always talk about the emotional work, because when you process the guilt, and if you are interested, I have a 5-day guilt detox. You can find it at the link in the description. It's only $7. You get lifetime access. You can start it literally today, and it's going to help you to not be controlled by guilt from your narcissistic mother or father or whoever the narcissist in your life is. And basically, once you get to that point where you are processing guilt instead of acting on guilt, it's going to sort of be a mindset of like, here's basically a preview of like what you can expect if you start processing your emotions and processing guilt instead of acting on it. It's going to be like, I feel guilty. I'm noticing that I'm feeling guilty. I'm getting curious about the fact that I'm feeling guilty. My mother's telling me I need to move in with her, otherwise I'm a bad person. You're gonna actually get curious about it instead of just making a hasty decision and do what she wants and ruin your life in the process, right? So you're gonna process the guilt. Maybe you're gonna journal about how you feel guilty about, you know, what your mother's trying to make you do and how you actually don't want to do it, but you don't want to feel guilty anymore. So you let yourself feel the guilt and you let yourself feel it in your body, because emotions are a physical process, not a mental one where we think about it. We have to actually feel it in the body. And that's something that I go way more in depth about in the 5-day guilt detox. Again, it's only $7. You get lifetime access and you can literally get started today. So check that out, the link in the description. And then, you know, once you kind of journal about the guilt, you're gonna sit with it. You're gonna notice what it feels like in your body. The intensity is gonna go down. That's you literally releasing the guilt from your mind-body system. And guess what happens when you release the guilt? You make space for clarity that, oh, my mother's trying to manipulate me. This is a trap. It would be a horrible idea for me to, sell my property or, break the lease at where I am living right now and go move in with her and overhaul my life, because I deserve to live my life. She's an adult. She needs to figure it out. I'm an adult. I'm figuring it out. But you can't get to that point of clarity if you're repressing all the emotions and making decisions because you don't want to feel those emotions anymore. The way to not feel those emotions anymore is by feeling them away from the narcissist. Because if you feel them in front of the narcissist, they're gonna use it against you and use it as supply, and they're gonna have so many things to say about it, and it's just, you've been warned. Narcissistic parent, they're going to make you feel guilty because it appeals to your empathy. They know you have empathy. Feeling guilty doesn't mean that you're doing something wrong. It literally just means that you're a human with empathy and emotions, and you don't want the other person to feel hurt because of something that you want to do or something that you don't want to do. Doesn't mean that you're guilty of committing a heinous, disgusting crime. But they're gonna make you believe that, obviously. And when you feel guilty, you're easier to control. And so you might get closer with your narcissistic parent because you feel so guilty about all the crap that they've been through in their life. Never mind the crap you've been through, because that's irrelevant. It's completely relevant, right? I'm being sarcastic there. And then you get closer and then the cycle continues, right? Things go to shit all over again. And that's literally all you ever have to look forward to with a narcissistic parent or any narcissist in general. That cycle of abuse, love, bomb, devalue, discard. It's going to continue over and over and over again, whether you like it or not. So the sooner you accept that that's it, and the sooner you start prioritizing yourself and your healing journey instead of them and their narrative, the sooner you're going to have, some semblance of sanity and a chance to actually have peace and freedom in your life.